The documents clearly stated everything. Chris's claim of ignorance was no excuse. I had already dismissed him, and now he was desperate. He accused me of fraud because I didn't list every skill on my resume. I couldn't help but laugh. Fraudulent hiring? Seriously? Not listing all my qualifications isn't fraud. Besides, I never claimed to only speak English. Chris, with a resentful tone, asked why I didn't highlight such a skill. If he had the same skill, he would brag about it. That's the difference between us. I didn't owe him an explanation. More pressing was the negotiation. If things continued like this, it was bound to fall apart. I heard Chris growling and grinding his teeth as he spoke. He said he'd step down and tell his father, who's the president. I asked him to put his father on speakerphone and explain why he tried to remove me from the negotiation. When Chris started speaking, I knew I'd won. The negotiation was successfully concluded. I arrived at the hotel room 10 minutes late and began the negotiation. I advised Chris to avoid speaking English for those 10 minutes. Amusingly, he had memorized the Arabic phrase, "Mark will be here soon," and kept repeating it. David had booked me a room on another floor, anticipating this situation. Although I could have arrived on time, David suggested arriving late to teach Chris a lesson. Americans are often late, so I joked about it. Discussing time differences between Arabs and Americans helped the conversation flow smoothly. Once the conversation became enjoyable, the contract was practically signed. After seeing off our guests, I took a deep breath. Chris, who had been frozen in the corner, slumped into a chair, exhausted from the tension. John thanked me and apologized for Chris's behavior. He said they'd impose disciplinary actions on Chris. Chris fell silent under John's glare. John mentioned discussing the disciplinary actions when we returned to the office. Back at the office, David, who had been called to the president's office, smiled when he saw me. "Everything went well, judging by your expression," he said. "Was the hotel comfortable?" "Thanks to you, I slept very well," I replied, seeing John's puzzled look. David laughed and explained, "Chris told Mark he was either going to be promoted or demoted. We couldn't lose him, so we needed you to understand his misconduct. We asked him to help expose the company's issues." I added, "If I had reported Chris's actions myself, you'd have been skeptical, even when David told you, you didn't take it seriously." John looked embarrassed. "You're right. I apologize. We had to corner Chris to get him to confess." John turned and shouted at Chris, "I took you in when you had nowhere else to go, and this is how you repay me? It's like being bitten by my own dog. Write your resignation letter today, but you can stay until you find another job." John's glare made Chris tremble. "If you don't want to resign, you can be fired. You had no problem threatening Mark with the same choice." Chris quickly agreed, "Okay, I'll write it." I struggled to suppress my laughter as Chris rushed to HR. His resignation was processed immediately. At the next week's morning meeting, John detailed Chris's misdeeds and announced that those who aided him would face consequences. Those who had reluctantly helped Chris were transferred to lesser positions, and some resigned under scrutiny. The company's hiring approach shifted, bringing in individuals in their 30s and 40s, which proved to be a positive change. This allowed young employees who had previously felt constrained to thrive. Removing Chris from the equation revitalized the company. However, Chris now struggles to find a job, facing the consequences of his past actions. While understanding the need for decisive measures, John was curious about why I had kept my ability to speak 7 languages a secret, as it could be a valuable asset in job searching. I chuckled and explained that, for me, it had been more of a hindrance than a benefit. Throughout my student years, I had developed a deep passion for languages, becoming fluent in 7 by the time I graduated. I initially used this skill to secure a job after graduation but soon found myself confined to interpretation and translation tasks. Despite my desire to take on more involved roles in negotiations, I was restricted to merely interpreting conversations for the executives. Even when I knew how to improve a deal, I was not allowed to voice my opinions. Frustrated, I requested a transfer, but my superior denied it, stating that an interpreter only needs a functioning mouth, not necessarily intelligence. They whispered about me when I wasn't around and criticized me whenever I stumbled. Although I was summoned to key discussions, they mistakenly believed I was receiving special treatment, which made them resentful. I realized that staying would have been disastrous, so I left. This pattern repeated itself at the next 2 companies I worked for. I was taken advantage of, faced jealousy, and experienced resentment. To avoid this, I decided to downplay my language abilities during the interview process at the 4th company. David saw through that immediately. Mark shared how the companies crumbled after his departure, driven by jealousy and extreme actions. The situation with EVP Chris was a prime example. Fearing our company might face a similar fate if we pushed Mark out, we collaborated on a drastic solution. John expressed his gratitude, saying, "Thank you for your dedication to the company, and thank you, Mark. I'll repay you both someday." He shook our hands firmly. John kept his promise. The following year, David became the president and John advanced to the role of chairman. David served as the interim president until the issues were cleared, and he was highly satisfied with the outcome. I was also promoted from sales manager to executive vice president. However, since I still manage the sales department, the hectic business pace remains unchanged. My current focus is to develop reliable subordinates to share the workload. Utilizing my linguistic abilities, I refuse to limit their application solely for expedience. I firmly uphold the responsibility of those in positions of authority to nurture the development of diverse talents, and I conscientiously apply this principle in the execution of my daily duties.